Welcome everybody. This is part 2 of our notes on the digestive system. So we're going to start right where we left off. We left off at the top of the stomach. We talked about the idea that there is, at the base of the esophagus, there's this muscle right here, which is called the esophageal sphincter muscle. And that is the purpose of that is that when food enters your stomach, it closes and makes sure that as your stomach is mixing around and the contents are going through, that you actually, you don't let that food go back into your esophagus. There is a problem with that. When that happens, that's called acid reflux, that you're actually letting the stomach acid back into your esophagus. So there is a part here called the fundus at the top of the stomach. There's the main body of the stomach. And it is curved and gets a little narrower. And then the other end of the stomach has another sphincter muscle. And the purpose of that muscle is to make sure that all the contents stay in the stomach for as long as they need to go through the chemical and mechanical digestion that is occurring there. Inside the stomach, there are these things called rugae. Those are these wrinkly, curved little folds in the stomach lining. And those are important because what is happening is there's actually specific things that are in those folds that actually produce the necessary components inside the stomach. So what's going on in there? That's where these gastric pits are. These gastric pits produce several things. One of them is mucus. And that may seem a little silly. Why are we producing mucus? Well, the point of the mucus that is produced by the lining of the stomach is to actually protect the lining of the stomach, because the digestive juices that are put into the stomach will actually eat away at the lining of the stomach if you let it. So we produce this protective coating that makes sure that the stomach doesn't actually keep that in. You introduce hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is going to help break down a lot of different chemicals. You produce some hormones that we're not going to get into. And then another really important enzyme is an enzyme known as pepsin or pepsinogen. And pepsinogen is a protein that breaks down proteins. I know that's a little weird, but when you eat anything with proteins, the pepsinogen is going to break that down. So inside the stomach, we actually go from what was food, it turned into a bolus, which is the mashed up food with saliva, and now it's going to turn into what is called chyme. The hydrochloric acid introduces does a lot of things. It kills bacteria, which is one really important thing, and pepsin works better when it is in that presence of that very low pH. The pepsin breaks apart the proteins, the mucus protects the surface. Ulcers are another problem you can have in your stomach. If anyone's ever had them, they're not fun. Ulcers are basically a hole that develops in the lining of your stomach because of, often it's a infection by a bacteria. But some other things can activate it. Increased stress can activate it. Overproduction of acid, so like an antacid. So all those things. And so people that have frequent ulcers will often have to, cut down on acidy foods. Excuse me. And then we talked about heartburn, is that backflow of chyme into the esophagus. All right. So moving along. Movement of the stomach moves in these waves, and it sort of mixes everything around. The regulation of the stomach emptying is critically important. So you don't want to release the stomach's contents too fast, because it will not be digested enough. If you release it too slowly, you actually have too much acid in your stomach, and it'll start to damage your stomach. So there's the delicate balance of how long the chyme stays in your stomach is particularly important. And it will be different depending on the food that you eat. So once we move on to the small intestine, It's very, very long, even though the name implies, it's small. It's small in diameter, not in length. And it is on average 6 meters. So that's almost 20 feet. Take, 5 very large steps, and that is how long your small intestine is if you stretch it out. So very long. And its main job is to do the absorption. So it's broken down into 3 parts. The first one is the duodenum. It's the first 12 inches. So it's right after the stomach. So it's this little curvature right down in here. So that first section. And what you will see inside the surface of the small intestine is that there are these small projections on the inside. We call these projections villi, and even if you zoom in at a microscopic level, there are these little finger-like structures on the finger-like structures. So you have villi and microvilli. And basically what it does is it increases the surface area of that stomach by about 600 times. So if you were to take the stomach, the lining of the small intestines, and take that surface area and spread it out, it would be about the size of a tennis court. So it is huge. And the other important thing that's happening at the duodenum is you have 2 major ducts that drain in there, what's called the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. Jejunum and ileum are the second and third sections of the small intestine. So as you move along, we're not going to get into the details of each particular curve, and that would be too much. But as most of the absorptions happens in that first duodenum, and then it decreases over time as you move along. We also decrease in the diameter, so it gets smaller and smaller. And the walls of the intestines get thinner and thinner. You also have some enzymes that actually occur inside there that continue the breakdown and digestion of that food, even though the main purpose of the small intestine is absorption. So here's where we get to our accessory organs. The liver. It is the largest internal organ by mass. Lungs are by volume, the lung is the biggest. And technically the skin is your largest because but most people don't think of your skin as an organ. But your liver is very large. Its main job is to break down toxic chemicals, but it has another part of this that is really important in digestion. So you have a duct called the common bile duct that actually connects to the beginning of the small intestine, that duodenum. So what does the liver do? So here, the first part is the part that is the digestion part, which is that it produces this chemical called bile, or this mixture, I should say. It's not even a specific chemical. Bile is not something you really want to see. It's kind of gross and disgusting. It's a greenish, and it's got a lot of salts in it. It's actually waste, but it's this byproduct that the liver produces, and it actually helps with digestion, because as you enter, as this bile enters the small intestine, it actually is able to neutralize the material that is coming from the stomach. You can't have it be super acidic as it's moving through there. So that is going to be the main digestive part of the liver. The other things it does is it stores lots of minerals, fats. It's very high in glucose and all kinds of things. We use the liver to interconvert nutrients. If you're low on a particular nutrient, you're able to use whatever you do have and turn it into something else. Detoxifying, and it produces, it takes ammonia, turns it into urea. That's what's in your urine. And then we produce other types of chemicals like fibrinogen and clotting factor, which are important in your blood clotting. So then you have 2 other organs. We have the gallbladder. The gallbladder is right on the back side of the liver, and it is simply a sac to hold bile. if without the gallbladder, your liver would slowly just allow bile to go into the small intestine. But the problem is that's not how we eat. We don't eat a little bit at a time all day long. We eat usually in bigger meals. So what the gallbladder does is it stores the bile up. It actually concentrates it. And then when you eat a meal, the gallbladder releases that bile and allows it to neutralize. You can obviously have your gallbladder removed, and in that case, those people would have trouble neutralizing their food. So they would have to eat low acid foods. They would have to eat smaller quantities and more frequently. So then we have the pancreas. Pancreas is sort of located right below the stomach, and it produces a chemical. It does other things, including make insulin and glucagon, which we talked way back at the beginning of the semester, but the pancreas also produces a chemical called pancreatic juice, and that is delivered through the pancreatic duct. Pancreatic juice is simply another component that neutralizes the acid, and it adds to the digestive nature. So you add some more digestive juices. Okay. So there's our liver, and then on the back side is that gallbladder, and then we have the pancreas and that pancreatic duct, and they both come in here through into that first part. The stomach is heading up off to this section. Okay. All right, moving to the large intestine. So typically food or chyme, once it reaches the large intestine, takes anywhere from 18 to 24 hours to get through there. And the job of this is to turn chyme into feces. So you're taking what is that juice of what that has all those digestive juices, and you're turning it into feces. How does it do this? Well, it's basically bacterial aided digestion. The large intestine is a home for bacteria, and it allows the bacteria to get whatever it can out of the food that you were unable to absorb. And what this allows you to do is actually get another, 10% more energy out of that, because by allowing the bacteria to do the digestion, it gets things out of the food that you could not. And it gives you that little bit of extra energy, and helps you digest food that your body doesn't have the ability to produce or absorb. So, to do this, to convert chyme into feces, you basically have to add mucus that allows the fecal matter to stick together. It absorbs water so that it becomes more solid. And then you go through, basically there are 4 parts to this. There's the cecum, which is a sort of roundish part at the beginning of your small intestine. That includes a little projection called the variform appendix, which is most people just call the appendix. Then we go through the colon, which is the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. Basically, you go up, over, down, and across. And that is where you have the different sections of the small intestine. And then the rectum is the last part, or the second to last part. It's a straight muscular tube and is a much thicker lining. Then the anal canal is simply the last part where you have 2 sphincter muscles that control bowel movements. There is the nice little picture. We have our cecum, ascending colon, transverse, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, and anal canal. Okay? And just to one last little bit, this appendix, we've talked about this, I think, before, but a lot of people consider it an evolutionary artifact, and I don't think that's truly accurate. Yes, you can live without your appendix, but what we think this is for is the idea that, remember, this whole area is supposed to be allowing bacteria to aid digestion, but occasionally you get bad things in your digestive tract, and you have to empty this out through diarrhea. I mean, I know that's not pleasant, but that's what's happening. And when you get everything out of there, you want it to repopulate. The appendix was seen as a place where the bacteria could hide out and essentially repopulate later on. So you still need it, probably just not as much as you used to, because food is much safer today and you have usually a lot less problems. All right, guys, thanks a lot. That's the end. Talk to you guys later.